Well, hello and welcome. My name is Darrin Patrick.
And I'm Greg Surratt.
And you are listening to the Pastors Collective, a show where we talk about pastoring in the trenches, the work, the challenges, the joys of serving churches.
So you'll hear from us, and you'll also hear from some of our friends and pastors all across the country. Hopefully you'll hear unfiltered truth about what makes this work so hard and so rewarding.
All right, Greg, who is on the show today?
Our guest today is Chad Blansit, and Chad is the pastor of Destiny Church in Republic, Missouri, multi-site church in that area.
Yeah, near Springfield. How'd you get to know Chad?
Interesting. First of all, Chad is a part of the ARC, which I serve as president of, and so we bump into each other at conferences and what have you. And then I went fishing with Chad and spent a day with him.
Which is the key to your heart, by the way.
It is the key to my heart, that and blues guitar music. But anyway, went fishing, and I don't know that we did all that well fishing, but we connected. And then we've just spent time together, and I love Chad. I was at his church for I believe their 10th anniversary service, and it's amazing what they're doing. And the closer I got, the more I saw that his story was exceptionally unique, and I think it's going to be very, very interesting.
So this was a great conversation, but pretty heavy. We want to say up front that we get into the topic of suicide here, and if you are struggling with suicidal thoughts or ideas, please, before we go any further, get some help.
You can pick up your phone and call 1-800-273-8255. That's 1-800-273-TALK, and ask for some help. That's the National Suicide Helpline, and they're available 24/7. You need to know you are not alone. You can find that number and other resources in our show notes as well.
It's a heavy conversation, but I think it's going to be helpful to you and maybe some people that you love. Thanks for tuning in. So we are here with Pastor Chad Blansit, pastor of Destiny Church in Springfield, Missouri, the heart of Missouri, some would say. Would you say it's the heart of Missouri?
I would say it's real close to the heart.
Yeah. We don't really count you in St. Louis. We don't really feel like that's a part of the state, but we want you to feel good about this interview. So whatever you want to say is great.
If the Kansas City Chiefs had won the Super Bowl, that might have been the heart, but I'm not sure.
Chad, I spent about 20 minutes in Springfield in college, way back in the 70s.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard anybody count their college career by minutes? I've never heard that.
That would be a first that I've heard somebody say I was in college for 20 minutes.
He almost made it through one class.
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
One semester. I got through a couple of classes, but almost made it a semester.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, Chad, man, tell us a little bit about how you got into ministry and just take us back to those early days and maybe the first few churches you served.
Yeah, I'm 43 years old. I am fifth generation pastor on one side, third or fourth on the other. My family's told me, I can't remember it. The last thing in the world I ever wanted to do was be in ministry.
Hang on a second. Fifth generation. When is that? What's that?
Your grandpa, his grandpa,
great grandpa.
My grandparents on both sides were pastors. Great grandparents back in even before that. I was told that some of my great grandparents were like traveling ministers and things like that. But yeah, it goes way back there.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so you didn't want to be a pastor.
Oh, last thing I wanted to do was be a pastor. I always remember as a kid, I just always told people I just wanted to make money. But yeah, I was called into ministry at 19, but I've been doing it quite some time. Grew up in an Assembly of God church. Parents were AG pastors. Both grandparents were AG pastors. My dad had one brother. He was a pastor. My mom had two sisters. They were both married to pastors. So it was all around us. So that's just kind of what our family did. Or the other side of the family was on a stage in Branson singing. So it was either preach or sing. And I guess I was supposed to preach.
Is that an indictment against your singing?
No, I can actually sing a little, but I don't do it too much.
Well, we'll get to that at the end of the podcast.
But yeah, started ministry. I went in full time at 19. I actually went on staff with my parents. They asked me to start small groups in their church. They called them care groups, and I was 19 in ministry, first time in ministry, and this was the first time they were launching small groups, and so they made me do that. Right after that, I became their youth pastor.
Chad, hang on a second. Does that end well? Does this story end well? My dad fired me.
I don't have that.
You don't have that?
I resigned from my parents' church.
Okay.
I did not get fired.
Okay.
Would you have gotten fired?
No, I would not have gotten fired. It was actually pretty successful ministry. Great youth group. It was a growing youth group. But then the Lord called me to travel and speak, and so I started traveling at the age of 22, full time. Was traveling and speaking, and then what we'll get into here in a little bit, some tragedy happened in my life, and I was out of ministry for a couple of years, about 25, 26, I can't remember exactly. I went back into ministry in Wichita, Kansas. In 4 years, I was in 4 cities in ministry, kind of like Pastor Greg's college career. I wasn't there very long.
So you would go and travel and speak at youth groups, churches, kind of revivalistic kind of stuff? Yeah. What was your go-to message? Because you probably only had like 4 of them, right? And you just preached them everywhere?
No, my game then was when I started traveling is kind of when revival was kind of happening, and people might remember the term Brownsville revival or Smithton, things like that. A lot of revivals were happening. And so every church I'd go to, they'd ask me to stay. And I'm some 22-year-old kid that doesn't have a whole lot of messages. And I remember one church, I was there 21 straight days, and I think I went in with like 4 messages.
Oh,
so it was every
goodness.
day, Lord, give me help,
So you got close to Jesus on that.
I got real close to Jesus, and there was times I didn't get a message, so I just kind of just like, hey, we're just going to just worship tonight.
Yeah, that's right.
And but those were interesting days, but saw a lot of people saved. It was pretty an interesting experience for me doing that. Loved it. Would not want to go back and do it anymore with a wife and 4 kids. I mean, I was gone all the time, but it was an interesting experience.
Yeah. So you alluded to the tragedy. Bring us into that. Kind of what happened and how you walked through that.
Before I get to the tragedy, let me take you to June of 2015. I was approaching my 40th birthday. June 19, 2015, I turned 40. And I remember earlier in that year, really when 2015 rolled around, I remember one day I looked at my wife and I said, something is not right. I don't want to turn 40. And she kind of laughed at me. And, we both kind of made light of it and didn't really know what it was. But as I got closer and closer to my birthday, I would tell her, I'm terrified to turn 40. Something doesn't feel right. And, the week leading up to my 40th birthday, Pastor Greg, I was actually in Montana with you at Refuge with Brian Carpenter.
Right.
And we were there, and I got home on that Friday, June 19th. I'll never forget it. My wife had thrown me a little surprise party with just some of our closest friends. There was 3 couples there. We were sitting around our fire pit in our backyard, just having a good time. And 9:00 that night, I'll never forget it as long as I live. It was like somebody turned off the lights in my world. It was the weirdest experience. It was like somebody flipped a switch. And I immediately became, I don't know if the word would be depressed or what it was, but I became a different person. My wife likes to say now that I became crazy, Chad. It was a horrifying experience. I remember at 9:00, I sat there. It was like this demonic stuff was happening in my brain. I got up, went inside. Tasha came in. She followed me, and she's like, what's going on? I started yelling at her. All the friends left the house, and it was the worst experience ever. And it was just the beginning of what started spiraling for me. Depression, suicidal thoughts. I'd never walked through anything like it. I've always been a pretty positive person, always seen life kind of as the glass is not just half full, it's 3/4 of the way full. That's just kind of how I did life. I've always had faith. But man, for a solid year of my life, It was horrible.
Describe that. Like, what was the depression like? What did it feel like?
In Psalms 13, verse 3, it talks about kind of restoring the light to your eyes. And I've just kind of come across that passage lately, but Tasha would tell me, she's like, it was like the light would go out in my eyes. She said she could see it like close over me. And that's what it felt like on the inside. I didn't know what the outside looks like. But it was literally like the lights were shut out, and it got confusing. I've never had panic attacks. I started having panic attacks, would have to pull over on the side of the road. Crazy thoughts like that everybody was out to get me, that I was of no value, that I was no good, that I was worthless, that I was a failure, and that my family's life would be best if I just wasn't in the picture. And I fought that a lot. And then finally, I just started kind of giving into those thoughts, and I would disappear for hours and hours at a time, tell my wife I'm leaving. I remember multiple times sitting in cemeteries, just kind of wishing I would die. But I was always terrified of suicide because, I just was like, man, I don't want to commit suicide. And then I'd always see my boys. I have 3 boys and a daughter, but I'd always see my boys because I've kind of always taught them sports. And I was thinking, who's going to coach my kids' sports? And that would always kind of keep me from making some stupid, foolish decisions. But one time I took off with a gun with full intention of killing myself. And to this day, I still don't know why I never did. I don't know. I don't have a clue. I don't know why. Just because in that place, I can understand it because there was no rational thinking for me. Tasha would try to talk me out of it. Nobody else in my family knew anything at this time. The only person that was taking the brunt of my anger and my pain was my wife. And she was a trooper. She was amazing through it.
So, Chad, talk to me about, you don't just arrive at that one day, do you? I mean, what kind of led to that? Is there a buildup?
For me, there was a buildup. I did, at the time, now that I'm on the other side of it, I can see the buildup. At the time, you don't. You don't know what's happening. Being a pastor, being in ministry, for me, I started forsaking spiritual disciplines. I would study to preach a message or to lead a life group or to lead my staff or things like that. But I'd stop feeding my soul. I'd stop spending time with God. I would have to say probably, I think I was probably going to heaven, but I don't think I had much of a relationship with the Lord leading up to that. There was no intimacy with him, and it just kind of kept getting worse and worse. And I think that just led up to it. I think it was just I think it was a little bit of burnout, really. My mom told me when I was walking through this, I've always just kind of been this person that's full of dreams and vision, and I'm never content, and I don't celebrate the wins real well. I kind of focus on the little bitty losses and just kind of get consumed with that and comparing myself to everybody else. And my mom one day called me up when she found out I was going through all this. And she said, Chad, I love your drive to conquer the world. But she said, son, I'm so afraid your drive to conquer the world is going to conquer you. And I think that's what was happening in me. I think I was just getting consumed with everything and just slowly, day by day, just getting worse and worse. And then when I hit 40, that's just kind of when it started spiraling.
Had this been building? I mean, so you're basically like a child, not quite a child, but you're a young evangelist. You're traveling all over the place. You're obviously gifted, or that you wouldn't be doing that kind of stuff. So do you feel like, I know this was true for me, that at times you're using your gifts almost as a cover for your intimacy with God?
Oh, yeah.
Did you feel like that had been a pattern?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think, like both of you sitting there and myself, I can get on a stage having not spent a whole lot of time with God, and I know how to move a crowd, and I know kind of what people are looking for. And I was able to do that because, when I was traveling, that was at a height of my intimacy with God. And so that was, even in the midst of 21 straight days of preaching, I was able to hear from the Lord and write messages. They weren't the best. I've probably never preached to any of them a second or third time. They weren't one of those, great messages, but they were in that moment. For me, being a lead pastor was where I started noticing some of that, just all the demand.
When you had to manage people and deal with betrayals and people leaving, and then the pressure on your family, that's what got you.
Exactly. And then growth, just crazy growth, trying to keep up with growth of a church and multiple campuses and keeping up an image, being around pastors and friends, and and it's not ever intentional, but this comparison game that is your church better than mine or bigger, and I was caught up in all that. So then I start really, if you want to know the truth, I start focusing more on strategy rather than relationship. And so every meeting was about strategy and what can we do better, and hey, this church did this, and you just kind of lose sight of it, and you just find yourself distant from God, and you don't even know how you got there. And that's where I was. And some people, it turns out, and they run into the arms of another person. Some people, they quit ministry. Some people, they commit bank fraud or different things. For me, it became this place of sheer terror and depression and panic attacks and anger like I'd never known, and fear. It was overwhelming. It was dark.
How did you come out of the hole?
It was at an art conference. I was horrible, and I walked into the church that the conference was at, and saw all the people, and it was the first time I'd been around a big crowd, like that massive of a crowd with that many people that I knew, and it overwhelmed me, and I left, and we went back to our hotel room, and I started packing my bag, and it was me and my wife, and we had our two youngest sons with us, and then our executive pastor and his wife and their daughter. And I started packing my bags, and Tasha's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm leaving." She's like, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm leaving you. I'm leaving the kids." She's like, "Where are you going to go?" I'm like, "I don't know." She's like, "What are you driving?" I was like, "I don't know. I'll walk down the freeway." I was like, "I'm going in the mountains. I'm going alone. I'm going to kill myself. I don't know. Just tell everybody I love them." I mean, it was literally at a horrible place. She called my executive pastor. He came down to our room and got in the door. He stood in the way, got in front of the doors. I'm dragging my bag, trying to get out of the room. And he's like, "You're not leaving." And I remember I looked at him and I said, "Get the F out of my way. I'm going to kill you."
Hmm.
And he just stood there. And I remember I kind of fell my head into his shoulders and said, "Please help." That was kind of the beginning of me kind of letting anybody else know what I was going through. So Pastor Rick Bassett and Pastor Randy Bassett, I met with them the next day, and they said, "We want to help you, but if you don't get help, if you don't do what we tell you, we're not really going to help you." And so they said, "You need to go to a counselor." And so I went to a place called Blessing Ranch with Dr. John Walker, with Tasha, and that started the healing process. I mean, it was still a long ways, but that's really what started the process, talking to him. Even before that, the church sent me to a counselor. And so here's where the story kind of picks up, though, is so both these counselors were trying to find out what started all this for me. And we've talked about, I think, my spiritual disciplines and all of that, but they traced it back to 17 years at that point in time in 2015. They traced it back to 17 years before that. Here I am, 23, 24-year-old kid, married June of 1999. My daughter is born on June 16th. I'd just gotten off the road. I just got home from preaching at a revival, just got home. My daughter is born on June 16th. Best day of my life, really. I mean, your first child, a little girl that just instantly had me wrapped around her fingers. We're building a house at this time, so we're living with my in-laws. And in their basement, my wife looks at me one day on June 22nd, 1999. A little after 5 o'clock in the morning, looks at me and she says, "I have a horrible headache." And I said, "Man, you need to probably run upstairs." She says, "Well, will you feed?" And my daughter's name's Mariah. And, my story, she's as much a part of this story as anybody. And she says, "Will you feed Mariah while I go upstairs and get some medicine?" And I was terrified. I mean, this is my first real watch on as dad duty. And, even she's just upstairs, but I was terrified. And so I'm feeding her and get done feeding her and just making sure my daughter's breathing, watching every movement. 45 minutes later, my wife's still not downstairs, back to the bedroom from getting some medicine. So I walk upstairs, pick up my daughter. I said, "Hey, let's go check on your mom." And I walk upstairs, and the craziest thing I'd ever seen, my wife was laying in the floor with pills all around her, just pill bottles, everything. My in-laws are standing there, and my brother-in-law was standing there, and he was a doctor, and he was on the phone. And and he looked at me and Chad, and I don't remember exact words, but in essence, it was this: "Chad, it's not good." And just a few minutes later, we just lived 15 minutes from the hospital, and a few minutes later, a helicopter lands in our front yard. And when a helicopter lands in your yard, it's probably not good. My mother-in-law and I get in the vehicle, drive to meet them at the hospital. I walk in, the doctor meets me in the hallway, and he says, "Mr. Blansett," he said, "your wife has had a severe brain hemorrhage, and we don't know the prognosis. You can come in and say hello to her. It might possibly be goodbye, but we're going to do everything we can to help her." And I walked into that hospital room at St. John's Hospital. It's now Mercy in Springfield, Missouri, and I saw my wife in a comatose state. And that day was the last time she'd ever spoke to me. It was a traumatic experience. Psalm 23 has kind of become my life chapter. When it said, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." First 24 years of my life was handed to me on a silver platter. It was easy. I was not conditioned and built for this day to walk in there. And I remember I walked out of the room as they said, "We're going to take her into surgery." My dad was standing there, and I fell in my dad's arms. And this girl was my childhood sweetheart and the mother of my daughter. And I looked at him and I said, "I can't do this. I can't go on without her." They did the surgery. She survived the surgery. Doctors come and they're like, "Hey, we're going to have to move her to Columbia, Missouri for some rehabilitation." And this entire time, my faith is at a high. Honestly, I'm thinking God's going to heal her and do some miraculous thing. And every day I'm believing that.
Hey, Chad, what actually happened? Was it a brain hemorrhage? Is that what is that?
It was a brain hemorrhage. They don't know. She had some high blood pressure during pregnancy. She was a cheerleader in high school and in college. She was always one of the flyers. She got dropped a few times. They said it could have been she, hit her head and had a concussion when she was a cheerleader and just had a small spot on her brain that burst during labor and delivery. They said they really have no idea. Even to this day, there's no reason behind it. It just happened.
So the medication that was, on the floor when you found her, it wasn't her overdosing on medication.
No.
It was a brain hemorrhage.
It was that she was reaching for some Tylenol and she passed out and knocked everything out of the cabinets when she was falling, and she spilled the Tylenol bottle. There's pills all over the floor and bottles from the medicine cabinet. She had knocked it all out all over the floor. Now she didn't do anything wrong. It was just that was when it happened, that exact moment. So she comes out of surgery. She's 6 weeks at Mercy at St. John's. It's now Mercy, but she was 6 weeks at St. John's in intensive care. And they kept telling us they're going to have to transfer her to Columbia, Missouri, to a place called Rusk Rehabilitation. And so I would look at them and say, "No, it's not going to happen. God's going to heal her." And my faith was at a high. The day that they get ready to transfer her comes about, and I'm thinking this is going to be the coolest story ever. They load her in a gurney in a hospital rolling kind of bed, and they're taking her out to the ambulance. And they've been telling me for days and weeks to prepare to move up there and to pack my bags and to be ready. And I hadn't done anything personally. I hadn't packed anything because I just knew that God was going to heal her on this day. And they wheel her out. It's a beautiful sunshiny day. They take her out. The ambulance doors are open, and I remember it like it was yesterday. I was there with full excitement, anticipation, thinking they're gonna put her in the ambulance and she's gonna sit up and say, "Let's go home." And they wheel her in the ambulance and they shut the door, and reality hit me. I don't have anything packed, and the ambulance driver looks at me and says, "You're gonna follow us?" And I said, "Man, I got to go home." I said, "I don't have anything packed." And they said, "Well, meet us there." And so again, we're living with my in-laws because we were building our first house, and driving to my in-laws' house. And I'm weeping. I am not just weeping, I am bawling like a baby. But this is the first time in my life I became angry at God. Like I've never known anger. I told God, I said, "God, I hate you." In May of that year, I had been prophesied over at my ordination ceremony. They had prophesied over me that I was going to be like one of those Weeble Wobble dolls that has sand in the bottom. They said, this lady was looking at me. She said, "You're going to get knocked down," but she says, "You're going to stand back up." Well, I get to my in-laws' house. I'm walking down the basement, and I see one of those Weeble Wobble dolls, this blow-up doll, standing at the foot of my stairs. I've never seen it. I kicked it, and it exploded and blew all over the place. And I looked at it, and I said, "God, that's what I think of you, and that's what I think of your prophecy." I said, "Never talk to me again." Packed my bags, got in my car, still crying, still angry. And I get about halfway between Springfield, Missouri, and Columbia, Missouri, and God sat down in my car. I didn't see him, but I felt him. and I felt him put his hand on my right leg. And I started crying, and I said, God, I'm sorry. I said, I didn't mean anything I said. I said, and he just whispered, he said, I know it, son. He said, I love you. He said, you couldn't heal if you didn't express your emotions. And it's just this intimate moment with him. And then it was gone. I walked in the rehabilitation center, and that was the next almost 6 months of my life was spent there. Remember, I've got a daughter. I'm not raising her. I'm not doing anything on her. I'm literally caring for my wife, and I'm a nurse. I'm a doctor. I'm doing everything I can. I'm changing adult diapers. I'm changing feeding tubes. I'm all of this. It was just, I'm barely seeing my daughter.
Where is she?
She would come up some. My parents would bring her up to Columbia some, or my in-laws would. She was living between Springfield and Columbia with either my mom, my mother-in-law, or my sister-in-law. They were all kind of taking care of her, and they'd come up, and I'd get to see her for a few moments. But honestly, for the first 2 years of my daughter's life, I didn't have much to do with her. And it wasn't anger or any of that. It's just I couldn't. I was taking care of her mother. She was at that rehabilitation center for almost 6 months. They sent us home. No hope. The doctor said the doctor was an Assembly of God deacon. And I remember he looked at me and said, Chad, if you don't have a miracle at 2 years, you'll never have a miracle. And so they sent us home. No miracle. 6 months. Living again. We had to let go of our house. I'm done working. I don't have a job. I'm not traveling as an evangelist anymore. My only job, my only responsibility is taking care of my wife. Insurance ran out. She had just been changing jobs, so insurance runs out. Medical bills are piling up. And in those 2 years of this all going down, I made less than $3,000, and my car payment alone was $500. And so, you know what that's like. So there's no money coming in. Bills are just piling higher and higher. And 2 years rolls around. Like I said, I'm fast forwarding through all of this, but 2 years rolls around. I go to Social Security, and I ask them to please help. I'm like, hey, I'm 25, 26. Again, I don't remember exactly at this time. And I said, I need some help. So would you help take care of my wife so I could go get a job? And I remember the lady looked at me, and she said, Mr. Blansett, she said, you can't make more than $700 a month. She goes, if you make more than $700 a month, we can't help you. But if you'll make less than that, we'll help your family. And I said, I'm well abled. I said, I'm healthy. I can't live off the government. And she says, I know. She said something like, the system's not set up for guys like you. I said, what do I do? And she says, well, you probably need to consider getting a divorce so that your wife could become a ward of the state, and then every need of hers will be met. And I was an AG boy. Assembly of God, do not pass go straight to hell was what I always felt like concerning divorce. And so I went home, didn't feel like I could do it. Prayed, and that night a lady came to our house to pray for my wife, and she said, hey, the Lord wanted me to tell you. She said, I was praying today. The Lord wanted me to tell you he releases you, but more than that, my wife's name was Carrie, and he said, Carrie releases you. She said, Carrie releases you. And I don't know if that's what it meant, but at that point in time, I felt like God was releasing me. And so I made the decision several days later to go ahead and get a divorce. And that's what my doctors, Pastor Greg, he asked me kind of like what started happening, to what caused this, brought it on. This is what Dr. John Walker and my psychiatrist at the time told me, all that I walked through, because I never went through any counseling, anything. Right when I got my divorce, I started refilling my schedule, and I was full. I was completely full to travel and speak again. And every church I knew, and they were in a rock and a hard place too. And so I don't blame anybody now, but every church I was scheduled at canceled on me. For one reason or another, but I know that all of it was boiling down to the fact that I was walking through a divorce, and so they all canceled on me. And I went and started trying to sell cars at BMW Porsche, and this was 2011, 9/11. Actually, I started selling cars a day or two after 9/11. So high-end cars were not moving in America at this point in time, and felt shame and rejection like I'd never known.
Let me ask you this, Chad. So the medical divorce, just to be clear, that was enabled your wife to basically get to turn her over, in a sense, to the care of the state.
Yeah.
So then she could be, because otherwise, what were your options to take care of her? Because you had no insurance.
Well, my options were that they would have taken care of her if I would have said, okay, I'm not going to make more than $700 a month. We as a family would have had to live off the government. But when I got a divorce, she became a ward of the state. Her parents had legal guardianship of her. But she became a ward of the state, and they pay for every medical bill, anything she has to go through. And she's in a nursing facility still to this day. My daughter's now she'll be 20 this year, so this was 20 years ago. She's still in pretty much a comatose state 20 years later in a nursing facility.
Chad, I don't want to make light of any of this, but I'm glad it's not a video because I'm crying like a baby right now. I cannot imagine the emotions that you went through and making some of the decisions that you made. And then to have, I'm proud of you, you're not casting blame, but people not understanding and saying, how can we have him come and preach for us? If he's abandoned his wife in divorce, which is not what it was. And
no.
So I'm sure that well, talk to us about that. How'd you process?
I didn't process it really. I just kind of always just went on. That was just kind of how I always did life. I never really dealt with emotion. Like I said, I'd never really had to deal with any. So there was a gamut of emotions through the whole process, but then the pain of what I had to walk through with my wife and losing her. She was my best friend. It was traumatic. That was awful. But the real pain for me was when I did make the decision to leave, the rejection. I felt like a fifth wheel all the time. Even when I was with her, that's one of the things the doctor traced back. I lost all my friends, and not from anything they did, but they were all married. And so I just was like, I'm not going to go out with married couples. I feel weird. My wife's laying in a bed, and you guys want me to go eat with you. And so I was feeling like a fifth wheel. I felt shame. I felt rejection. And then the divorce comes, and everybody turns their back on me. But it wasn't just pastors that I had scheduled to preach. It was friends. It was family that turned their back, and close family. They didn't turn their back on me, but they felt pressure from their churches and things to kind of turn their back and try to protect themselves. And so it just put up this wall with me and them. I lost almost everybody in my life for a season because of what I was walking through and what they were walking through. And if I could look back at myself, here I am 43 years old. If I could write a letter to myself at 26 years old, I would probably tell myself then, hey, you need to go to a counselor right away. But because I didn't, I just went through it. I just forged ahead, started selling cars. And then less than a year later, I'm back in ministry as a broken human being who's angry at God and angry at people, but I'm doing ministry again.
So the counselor pointed this out, obviously, that this was the catalytic event that led to some of your depression because you just pushed all that stuff down. You didn't deal with it.
Correct.
And so they were saying, hey, you got to go there.
Yep. So and that was what it was. He looked at me and he said, I can't believe you're actually as healthy as you are, even though I'm suicidal at this time. This is now this is February of 2016. I'm in Tampa, Florida at a place called Blessing Ranch with John Walker. He's like, okay, I'm surprised you're as healthy as you are because you never processed this. But he goes, here's what's happening. He says, your body's having a midlife crisis. And he's like, not like the midlife crisis, like where you need a red car and a blonde-headed woman. And I looked at him and I smiled and I said, good, because I have a red Jeep and my wife's a blonde. I said, I don't need those things. And, Dr. Brene Brown, she says it's not really a midlife crisis. She says it's more like a midlife unraveling. And that's kind of what he was even saying to me. It's your body's saying, hey, everything's healthy. At the point in time, ministry, even though I was broken, ministry was relatively healthy. Our church was growing. We had 2 campuses. But he's like, for the most part, everything's healthy, but your body's saying you can't move any further forward until you deal with this. And that's where I was. And so that started that process of me dealing with that hurt and that pain and walking through shame and emotion and counseling through that. Writing, I actually did have to write letters to myself to kind of release myself and to forgive myself. And that was the greatest thing for me. was forgiving myself. And if I could be honest with you, I still struggle with that at times. I still can get caught up in my head and bring back some of that old kind of religion and law that I knew as a young man, and really berate myself and beat myself up for some of the choices I made during that time.
Chad, earlier in your story, you mentioned Tasha and how she really hung with you through the difficult time when you're 40 and come to this low place in your life. Obviously, you remarried. Do you want to tell us about that? What happened there, and how did you process that?
Well, so I met Tasha during this process. She was dating a friend. They kind of broke up. There was this group of people around my age. They were all hanging out, and I knew them. I didn't get to hang out with them very often because I was taking care of either my wife at the time or my daughter. I didn't have much freedom, but every once in a while I'd get to be around them. Tasha's a pastor's kid also. So a time or two in that group, she would talk to me or I would talk to her. And there was, just this person that understood some of the trauma that I'm walking through. And her dad actually had me come and preach in their church. And when I started rescheduling churches, theirs was one of the churches I scheduled. And her dad was the only pastor that didn't cancel on me to come and preach. They still had me come and preach at their church. And he said, I don't care what you're walking through, where you've been. He goes, we're going to love you through that. So it was that time. After that, several months, Tasha and I started talking, and a little over a year after the divorce, we got married. It's been tough on Tasha, just even that whole process, having a stepchild and being a second wife and dealing with those emotions. I mean, the two of us with Mariah, our daughter, we could write a story. We could write a book of some trauma and some pain. And the reason I'm telling this story today and talking to you guys is I just know there's people out there that are like I was, that are just hurting. And I just want to help people. But man, my wife was amazing through it. We've been married now 16 years. This year will be 17 years. If I'm wrong, I apologize, but I'm pretty sure May will be 17 years that we've been married, and we have 3 kids.
Here's the principle. The principle, Chad. You need to remember the years that end in 0 and 5. There's grace on all the others. Okay, so you're all right.
Yeah, 0 and 5. I remember that. But Tasha and I have 3 kids together, 3 boys, and then Mariah. So we have 4 kids. But it was a journey for her to walk through. The divorce. And I'm not going into a whole lot of things, but that within itself was a journey and a battle. Even for custody of my daughter, which shouldn't have been, but there was a battle there, and just the attacks that I was taking, the attacks that Tasha was taking, even my family, my parents, and they had, my parents, they even had to take not turn their back, but kind of try to protect themselves a little bit through their church with some of the things that were happening. So it was just an interesting experience for all of us.
So do you feel like, you're a few years out of the depression? You had depression and anxiety. Those things tend to rear their ugly heads once in a while, at least the feelings of it. Do you still have those kind of weird anxieties, blue, kind of discouraging moments? And when you do, how do you deal with that now?
Yeah. So June of 2015 is when it started. It ended. My depression lifted. I literally felt it lift off of me. It was towards the end of July of 2016. So it was almost a full 13-month battle. So even after leaving Blessing Ranch, I still had multiple times I was spiraling. But I don't remember the exact day. It did feel like it lifted off of me. It just slowly, bit by bit. Tasha and I would talk, and we would have a week between bad days, 2 weeks, and you could just see it. And she would really encourage me and try to remind me of some of the things the doctors had talked to me about dealing with shame and rejection. So that helped. But really, one of the main things I did is I put myself on a schedule. After being at Blessing Ranch, I really put myself on a regimented schedule of how I was going to live my life, and started really studying topics concerning health, listening to stories even after I've come out of it, the Pastors Collective with you guys, just consuming everything I can on how to be healthy, holistically healthy. We've actually even themed our whole year as a church this year around the whole idea of holistic health, because I just believe we need that. But I make sure just real simple. I had to schedule daily quiet time for me personally, that it has nothing to do with studying for a sermon. So every morning, the first hour of my morning is spent with God. And I try to be as dedicated to that as I possibly can. Try to be dedicated to this word called Sabbath, but just trying to bring some healthy things in my life, balance and rhythm. Because here's the deal: panic still sets in, anxiety still sets in. Being honest with you, this right here, talking to you guys today, I sent some of my staff a text yesterday and asked them to pray for me, because I'm terrified to do this, to open up, to talk, to share my story. I get scared because I don't want to be rejected.
Yeah, you were rejected. So why do you want to share your story? Why are you passionate about that? Why did you say yes to us?
Pastor Greg, there's so many people out there hurting. So many people broken, just people sitting in churches, but so many pastors. I've had conversations with so many pastors and leaders that have been so broken and so hurting. And, I don't think I walked through what I walked through just to go through it. I think I walked through it because I guess the Lord knew I'd make it to the other side. And now my job is to give somebody hope. My job is to give somebody healing. I don't know if that's one man that's hearing this, or a woman, or a couple, or pastors, or whoever that is. That's just my heart. And I want to do whatever I can to help people avoid as much of what I walk through as possible, and to know there's a place of escape. Here's the deal. I think we all have to walk through things. I think we have to walk through valleys to get to the Lord's table. I think that's part of it. Psalm 23. I think we have to go through the valley of the shadow of death to get to the place the Lord has for us. And each of us, our journey is different and what that looks like. There's somebody out there that's walking through the valley right now, and they don't know if there's hope. They don't know a way out. I just want to be that voice that tells them, I want to be on the other side, cheering them on, saying you can make it. Because there's nothing like when you get to the other side. I still have bad days. I still have days but I've not since that time walked back into one of those dark places. I've not done it. And knock on wood, I hope I never go through it again. I hope I protected myself and shielded myself. But I still have panic attacks. I still have days where I get a little nervous. The last time coming home from the Pastors Collective, our plane got messed up in the air and started having to circle around. And I realized I was stuck on a plane and couldn't get off. And I started panicking, but I opened my Bible and started reading. So the Lord's given me some coping mechanisms now that I didn't have then. And I just want to do what I can to help people. And so that's why I share with you guys. I'm terrified. Terrified. I was a nervous wreck thinking about this. But if my story can be of hope and healing to somebody, then it's worth it.
Well, I'll guarantee you it has been. And I want to say thank you for being so transparent, so honest. I'm sure that your story will be one of blessing to many people. So let me ask you one more thing. What's 3 things that you would say to somebody who's in kind of a dark place? What's the 3 things you would say for them to do? One sentence, 3 things, 1 sentence each.
Well, especially for those that are in ministry, what I had to learn is don't gain the world and lose your soul.
Okay.
And then don't do life alone. Talk to somebody, build community. Don't be afraid of going to a counselor or a coach, somebody that can help you. And then number 3, make sure you're spending time with God. And that sounds cliche, but make sure that you're spending personal time with Him. What good is it if we're delivering sermons that are changing people, but our own soul is wasting away? So that's really what I would say to people is don't gain the world. Don't be so caught up in what's happening around you and comparing and, trying to get notoriety. Find a counselor, find somebody you can talk to, a friend, a community, and then make sure you're staying real close to God. That'd be what I would say to people.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you for sharing your story. And I guarantee there's going to be a lot of people that are going to have new courage to be vulnerable because of it. So thank you, brother.
Well, I've told you guys this, and I'm open to help anybody I can. And so if anybody reaches out to you guys can give them my email or whatever. I want to help pastors, pastors' wives, people sitting in the seats of the churches. Whatever I can do to help, I'm all in.
Well, thanks, Pastor Chad, and we will take advantage of your generosity there, brother.
All right. Love you guys.
We want to say it again. If you need help, if you're walking through a valley, pick up your phone, call 1-800-273-8255. That's 1-800-273-TALK, and get some help.
You know, Darrin, one thing that really stuck out to me from Chad's story is this. Pastors are people too. I mean, that seems so fundamental, but other people tend to put us on a pedestal. We tend to put ourselves on a pedestal. And then that pedestal becomes almost a prison. Mm. And pastors are subject to the same kind of trauma, the trauma of loss, of anxiety, of depression, the same as anybody else out there. And so that was really good to kind of flesh out of this interview.
Yeah, and I mean, when you're a pastor, you're trying to help people deal with all these kind of things, and it's hard when you're dealing with it. I know for me and for many of my friends, you kind of feel weird because you're like, okay, I can't really be honest about what's going on in me. And though we have these examples from the past with like Charles Spurgeon and different pastors who have talked about their depression, but it just feels like if I talk about my stuff, I'm going to lose authority. I'm going to actually make this thing about me. So it's a hard thing for pastors to talk about. And I love it that Chad was so bold and so forthright in sharing it. And I think it gives us permission to actually be honest about our struggles as pastors. So if you are a pastor and you're wrestling with these kind of issues, please reach out and get help. We have show notes to help you connect. And I love what Chad said when he said, "Hey, I'm ready to leave. I'm going to walk out. I'm going to leave everything." And there was a guy there that said, "No, you're not leaving your family. You're not leaving your church. You're not going to leave your life. We're here." And Chad was humbled at that point. He broke down, and all because someone said, "You're not leaving." And so we need those kind of people in our lives, don't we, Greg?
We really do. I don't know that everybody, I do know, I don't think everybody has suicidal thoughts, but I do think we all have abandonment fantasies. There are times when we think, I'd just like to get in the car, drive away, and leave whatever it is that is here. And if you can find somebody, and they're there. In fact, Proverbs says that a friend is born for adversity. And, I know that means a lot of things, but to me, one of the things it means is that I personally, as a friend to other people, you're one of them, and there have been several, I was born for the adversity in your life. Part of the purpose that God created me and had me live during this time, could have lived any time in history, was for your adversity. And if that's true, which I believe it is, there are friends who are born for my adversity. And that's part of their purpose. And so just be open. Sometimes people don't know until you share where you really are.
If you're enjoying our show, please subscribe today and give it a rating and a review in iTunes or wherever you're listening. It helps other people find the show. The Pastors Collective is a production of Seacoast Church and Narrativo. It was produced by Mike Cosper. It was edited by Quinette Connor. It was mixed by Mark Owens. Our music is by Dan Phelps. The Pastors Collective is executive produced by Greg Surratt and Darrin Patrick. You can learn more about our show and find transcripts at www.pastorscollective.com.
3, make sure you're spending time with God. And that sounds cliche, but make sure that you're spending personal time with Him. What good is it if we're delivering sermons that are changing people, but our own soul is wasting away? So that's really what I would say to people is, don't gain the world. Don't be so caught up in what's happening around you and comparing and, trying to get notoriety. Find a counselor, find somebody you can talk to, a friend, a community, and then make sure you're staying real close to God. That'd be what I would say to people.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you for sharing your story. And I guarantee there's going to be a lot of people that are going to have new courage to be vulnerable because of it. So thank you, brother.
Well, I've told you guys this, and I'm open to help anybody I can. And so if anybody reaches out to you guys can give them my email or whatever. I want to help pastors' wives, people sitting in the seats of the churches, whatever I can do to help. I'm all in.
Well, thanks, Pastor Chad, and we will take advantage of your generosity there, brother.
All right. Love you guys.
We want to say it again. If you need help, if you're walking through a valley, pick up your phone, call 1-800-273-8255. That's 1-800-273-TALK, and get some help.
Darrin, one thing that really stuck out to me from Chad's story is this. Pastors are people too. I mean, that seems so fundamental, but other people tend to put us on a pedestal. We tend to put ourselves on a pedestal. And then that pedestal becomes almost a prison. Mm. And pastors are subject to the same kind of trauma, the trauma of loss, of anxiety, of depression, the same as anybody else out there. And so that was really good to kind of flesh out of this interview.
Yeah, and I mean, when you're a pastor, you're trying to help people deal with all these kind of things, and it's hard when you're dealing with it. I know for me and for many of my friends, you kind of feel weird because you're like, okay, I can't really be honest about what's going on in me. And though we have these examples from the past with like Charles Spurgeon and different pastors who have talked about their depression, but it just feels like if I talk about my stuff, I'm going to lose authority. I'm going to actually make this thing about me. So it's a hard thing for pastors to talk about. And I love it that Chad was so bold and so forthright in sharing it. And I think it gives us permission to actually be honest about our struggles as pastors. So if you are a pastor and you're wrestling with these kind of issues, please reach out and get help. We have show notes to help you connect. And I love what Chad said when he said, "Hey, I'm ready to leave. I'm going to walk out. I'm going to leave everything." And there was a guy there that said, "No, you're not leaving your family. You're not leaving your church. You're not going to leave your life. We're here." And Chad was humbled at that point. He broke down, and all because someone said, "You're not leaving." And so we need those kind of people in our lives, don't we, Greg?
We really do. I don't know that everybody, I do know, I don't think everybody has suicidal thoughts, but I do think we all have abandonment fantasies. There are times when we think, I'd just like to get in the car, drive away, and leave whatever it is that is here. And boy, if you can find somebody, and they're there. In fact, Proverbs says that a friend is born for adversity. And, I know that means a lot of things, but to me, one of the things it means is that I personally, as a friend to other people, you're one of them, and there have been several, I was born for the adversity in your life. Part of the purpose that God created me and had me live during this time, could have lived any time in history, was for your adversity. And if that's true, which I believe it is, there are friends who are born for my adversity. And that's part of their purpose. And so just be open. Sometimes people don't know until you share where you really are.
you're enjoying our show, please subscribe today and give it a rating and a review in iTunes or wherever you're listening. It helps other people find the show. The Pastors Collective is a production of Seacoast Church and Narrativo. It was produced by Mike Cosper. It was edited by Quinette Connor. It was mixed by Mark Owens. Our music is by Dan Phelps. The Pastors Collective is executive produced by Greg Surratt and Darrin Patrick. You can learn more about our show and find transcripts at www.pastorscollective.com.